has talked about some sort of equivalent about how to fix the college football calendar. And all things considered, I love hearing these type of conversations because in order to better the game for the long term, it's a simply discussions and conversations that we need to have. I don't care whether it's Josh Pate talking about it, whether it's Blake and Ruffino, whether it's ESPN, Nick Saban, Pat McAfee. I don't care who it is. The reality is that these conversations need to be had, and quite frankly, they're not being had. I think there's a couple different reasons for that. I would say for starters that college football ratings are as high as ever and the TV record deals are as high as ever. So nobody really wants to take the initiative to say, hey, let's figure this shit out before it hits the fan too hard. I think for secondarily, there's an issue of ultimately everybody knows that the Big Ten and the SEC kind of run college football now in the sense they're getting the biggest TV deals, they're getting the biggest players, and any way that you're going to change the state of college football, you have to think about the Big Ten and the SEC pretty much before everybody else. And I'm not saying that's right or wrong. I'm just saying that as a objectively speaking, that's just the way college football is right now, whether you like it or not. And for this episode, I kind of asked myself, what are three different ways that college football's calendar can be fixed in a way that is semi-realistic? Because I think for starters, it's always good to have problems, right? It's always good to figure out what the problems are, but it doesn't matter what the problem is if you can't even offer some sort of resolution towards it. So therefore, I asked myself, what are three basic resolutions that I think are semi-realistic in this day and age of college football? And again, there's people out there who've talked about every little possible scenario, such as a big super league, which I'm entirely opposed for. So I'm not going to talk about that. I'm not going to talk about conference realignment because, again, that's a fairy tale. That's not something that's going to happen. I'm not going to sit there and talk about eliminating collectives because I don't necessarily think that portion of it is necessarily a problem, because in many ways it almost kind of runs similarly to the European League, whereas there's not really a salary cap or anything like that. It's more of, hey, whoever rounds up the most money and get the best players, they get them. And I don't necessarily see an issue with that. And for those of you who don't watch the show, I always ask myself, how can college football be different than the NFL in as many ways as possible? Because no matter how you look at it, the college football model is slowly but surely going to be obsolete at some point, and they are going to have to be adaptable towards some elements of the NFL. It's just which particular parts about the NFL are worth instilling versus which parts of it just need to be a part of the professional game versus the college game. And granted, now that these kids are getting paid, we can pretty much treat them like like professional athletes now. I'm not going to sit there and sugarcoat these kids as much as I used to. Again, granted, they're 18, 19, 20 years old. And, I was a college kid once too. And hey, I know I was dumb and immature and this, that, or the other. But at the end of the day, when these kids are getting paid to be out there on a football field, that's the way you have to treat them. So with that said, here are my 3 steps to fix the college football broken calendar. And hopefully it is somewhat of a realistic solution in terms of getting all these things resolved. I mean, first and foremost, too, I would say, again, kind of like what the quote says underneath, I don't necessarily blame the NCAA for any of this either. This is more of just things that kind of just avalanched and snowballed into something that really kind of just went completely off the rails, because I don't even necessarily think the NCAA itself is necessarily a problem. It's just as long as they have no credibility whatsoever, then it's always going to be issue to some degree. But first and foremost, aside from giving the NCAA some more credibility, the first step I would say is that you need to shorten the actual season itself. And what I mean by that is, I would argue that I don't necessarily have a problem with the whole week 0 thing, because again, it's supposed to kind of give you a taste, give you a flavor of some college football before the real start, which is Labor Day weekend. So what I would propose is, instead of starting on Labor Day weekend, let's shift the week 0 from a week before and then start the college football season the week after. Because, by and large, most kids are back in school by August anyway, or at least within late August. So it's not completely unrealistic for a lot of these kids to be ready for the start of the football season 1 week sooner. And Granted, too, there could be an issue of possibly some weather implementations you have to worry about, such as particularly down south, for example, which I could certainly see being a problem. But if you can at least just give yourself one more extra week, it definitely would create a lot more stability kind of towards the game moving forward too. And the one issue that you have to some extent too is because of just the way the colleges work, you have to align your expectations within that sort of schedule. So you know that for the fall schedule, it typically starts in late August and you're done within the first or second week of December. So regardless of how this all turns out, you have to keep your regular season college football schedule within those parameters. And when you're not, it's just simply not going to work or it's just not realistic, one or the other. So first and foremost, I would try to keep the week zero. The week zero whole thing is fine. But if you can just even extend that by a week and somehow find a way to have the conference championships be within the first week of December, that would totally be ideal. Because ideally, what you'd want to happen is, I don't necessarily think you can sit there and eliminate a bye week. At the end of the day, with so many different teams that we have now in FBS football and FCS football, it's just not realistic for all these teams to be able to play all these games with only one bye. So I don't necessarily think it's realistic to just get rid of one bye and that's it. I think you have to try to extend it by the week before, and then hopefully you can cut everything off by the first week of December, and that way you can do the conference championship games. You're probably going to have to still have the week of Army and Navy be a separate week, although it's problematic in terms of this conversation, but in terms of our country, we're just going to have to be a little bit selfless here and say to ourselves, hey, that's just a part of the college football week that we're just simply going to have to give up. So in terms of that resolution, that simply to me seems like the best resolution that could buy yourself a little bit more time and do it in a way where the college football season's not ending in the third week of January. Instead, it's ending in the first or second week of January like it always has. So with that said, let's say if we can reduce the college football season by one more week. We just start a little bit earlier. The next step I would say is, well, we're going to have to talk about the NIL and the transfer portal. And like I said a couple seconds ago, I don't necessarily have an issue with the whole collective part of it, because to me, where it gets dicey is when the schools are necessarily guaranteeing payments. So I love the idea of the collective and the school technically being separate. It's not Coach Mario Cristobal or Coach Moore necessarily sitting there saying, hey, kid, you're going to get $500,000 or $1 million come on this team. It's the collective made of this alumni and large donors that are necessarily calling the shots or getting the paychecks or what have you. So I think that part of it, I think, is good for college football. I don't think it needs to be some sort of big free agency like it is in the NFL now. I think it can be a little bit different. However, in order to kind of get some checks and balances on it, and most importantly, in order to have some sort of consistency in terms of rosters year to year, my proposal for the NIL, the transfer portal, all of this is this simple. What you can actually get the NIL for, I think, as is right now, is acceptable. I think you should be able to get paid if you're going to go and do a commercial for a car company. I think you should get paid to do a State Farm commercial. I'm not sitting there talking about stuff like that. To me, the bigger at large issue is kids actually transferring themselves. And I don't blame the quarterback from Penn State, Bo, for transferring at that time, because the way the college football calendar is, he had no choice but to make a decision at that time. And if he felt like it was best for him and his family to do it at that time, he really had no choice to. So you can't fault the kid for doing that. It's the adults and the leaders of college football, of college athletics, that simply haven't sat down and said, hey, this is what we're going to do. And quite frankly, that's what needs to happen. So with that said, my proposal is this simple. No ifs, ands, or buts about it. My proposal would be this simple. You get one free transfer. It doesn't matter what the head coaching situation is. Doesn't matter if you're a freshman. None of that matters. You get one free transfer. Then anything after that, the only way you can leave is if your head coach gets fired, if your head coach leaves for another school, or if your head coach retires. Those are the only scenarios where you can transfer again. And if none of those things happen, you're stuck at your school if you already transferred before. So with that said, I think that resolves a couple different issues. I think for number one, it provides some checks and balances, not only for the coaches, but also for the athletes too. When you actually commit to a school, it's a much bigger deal. And I use the phrase soft verbal. And what's funny is I mentioned the word soft verbal, and nobody's heard that phrase for probably 15, 20 years now. So it's actually could be realistic to have a soft verbal, kind of having that national signing day, that recruiting process that I think a lot of people love about college football is the fact that when you commit to a school, it's something that you're doing that's not only for yourself, but you're doing it for your team, you're doing it for your school, you're doing it for your community. It's larger than yourself. And I think by instilling this one free transfer rule, it gives you the balance of, yes, you do have the liberty to say, hey, I don't like it. I don't like it at Georgia. I'm not going to be the starting running back for another 2 or 3 seasons. So I'm going to go transfer. Okay, that's fine. But if you transfer, you better be damn sure that you pick the right school, because if not, you're going to have to hope that either your head coach gets fired or that he leaves for a better job. And if he doesn't, then that falls under the umbrella of, tough shit. You should have just picked a better school. And quite frankly, you should be keeping your commitment, because obviously, I even go back and think of Baker Mayfield. He left Texas Tech for Oklahoma and sat for a whole season because he believed in himself that hard. And he never contacted the Oklahoma staff. He didn't have any idea about that. So for me, when people sit there and say, oh, well, I can't talk to the coach, or I can't do this, or I can't do that, I'm like, it doesn't matter. You have to, at the end of the day, you're the athlete. You're the one getting paid. You're the one making the decisions. You're the one getting the degree. Why not have a little bit extra accountability and really make sure that these kids are thinking about their interests, not only in a financial perspective, but also from an education perspective, also from a life perspective? Because in this day and age of college football, as we talk about, is the financial aspect of it. Whereas at the end of the day, there also is an academic part of it. There is a very big part of it that, hey, 99% of you are not going to make the NFL. And it's probably the most amount of money that these kids will probably likely see in their lifetime. I mean, the majority of us, the average salary in this country is what, 70, 50, 60, $70,000, something like that. So for you to be offered millions of dollars, hey, I get the intrigue of that. But at the same time, we have to find some checks and balances. And to me, instilling it in this way gives players some sort of leadway, but it also doesn't have coaches sitting there saying, hey, you're now, instead of coaches trying to fight for their roster all year, trying to fundraise money all year, and trying to keep the players that they already have, it eliminates one portion of that. So for me, that would definitely be the best resolution I can think of in terms of how you handle the transfer portal from here on out. And last but not least, the best way to handle the window of that. So for me, step 3 would be that there's a simply one transfer window. I would go as far to say to eliminate the winter transfer portal altogether. Quite frankly, it creates a number of headaches. One, you're trying to handle all of this in the middle of the conference championship games and presumably in the middle of the college football playoff, which already is taking away attention from the student athletes, from the schools, and from the games themselves. I think eliminating that headache altogether would be such a brilliant resolution, especially by this point, deep in December. You already should have paid your college tuition for the spring semester anyway. So I don't think eliminating that part of it is necessarily a big deal. What I would propose is there's one window to be able to transfer and be able to sign all in one hit. Now I believe it is 20 days, which is quite frankly pretty ridiculous if you ask me. I just started a new job and I didn't get 20 days to sign my offer letter. They gave me a week to sign the offer letter, which I think even a week is more than reasonable. So I would propose, if you can somehow make it from the day of the conference championship to maybe the beginning of the college football playoff. I don't necessarily think the time frame of the portal is necessarily too important. I think what's most important is the fact that you're doing it all at one time. That way, all the coaches in college football and all the staffs and all the players are on an even playing ground, whereas everybody's transferring at the same time, everybody's signing at the same time, and it gives everybody the best equitable playing ground in terms of being able to fill out your rosters to the best of your ability with the players that are available. Because to me, when you have this sort of, oh, you can transfer in the spring and then you can do the winter time and then you can do this. To me, it should, if you can just try to eliminate this so it's all in the off season as much as possible, that to me seems like the best long-term resolution for college football. So if you ask me, the three steps that I think can immediately happen in order to fix college football calendar: step one, start the season a week sooner. So it's sometime within either ideally within the third week of August. Ideally, start week 0 then, and then have your first real week before Labor Day. Number two, you get one free transfer, and then anything after that, you either have to sit out for the year or you have to wait until your coach gets fired, leaves for another job, or retires. And then number three, and perhaps most important of all, having one NIL dash transfer window, ideally sometime within the off season. If you can only make it during the winter time, that's great. But I would propose eliminating the winter period altogether and trying to just make it during the off season. So let me know what you think about my resolutions to fix the college football broken calendar, and I'll see you guys next time.